All right. Playing against Jen, a 1000. I don't know if this is our first time. Why did I play e4? I literally just said last time I would play knight f3 first. It's okay because they played e6 instead. So we can get a proper King's Indian attack without worrying about e5. I wanted to play knight f3 first to avoid e5 lines. And this is the second time in a row where I've completely avoided my advice. Luckily, we get our King's Indian attack and I'm a happy man. So, cool. We got it. A King's Indian attack. This is a proper King's Indian attack now. And we have to ask ourselves, do we want to play c3 in a position like this, or do we want to play e5? We don't want to do either. We want to just play this like a normal King's Indian now. So their goal is going to be probably to play e5. I want to play a4. Why a4? So in these King's Indian positions, they want to go for a b5 and c4. a4 does two things. It cements the knight on c4, where it attacks e5, and also it makes it harder for them to play b5. So now that I played a4, even though they got e5, I'm going to play this knight c4 move, and it's going to be a little annoying. So this is actually just a straight up reversed King's Indian defense at this point. Well, it's in the name King's Indian attack, except we're a tempo up. And I think we're extremely happy here. They'll play queen c7. And if they ever try to play a move like a6, trying to play b5, first off, they have to move this bishop or defend the rook somehow, because we're always threatening to take. Again, if we just imagine a pawn on a6 and b5 and we take it, they can't capture back because their rook is hanging there. So if they go a6, we can always consider a5. Where if they play b5, we can take en passant. And we never allow the c4 break. At least we prevent it the best we can. Now I'm looking at this beautiful move here, knight e1. I also like knight h4. Both have the same purpose of going either knight f5 or simply to play f4. Let's play knight h4. This is the more active move, and I think probably the objectively better move. I always feel weird playing it because normally my opponents don't allow it. It's a good move though. I have a feeling that if I play, knight e5 would be an incredible move. If I play knight f5, I feel like they might take it. Is it a good move though? I'm not sure if it's a good move. They want to take on c4. Like, one thing that might happen is take on c4 and try to argue that their d-pawn could be a little bit stronger. One way we can try to react against it is by playing b3. And if they ever take on c4, we just take back with the b-pawn. That's also a good consideration to make. b3 or f4 or knight f5. Those are our three candidate moves, I think, in this position. f4 I'm a little bit tense about, but I think it works out. Maybe some f5, and if they ever try to get into e3, looks like we should be okay. We could also play knight a3, preventing them from playing that move immediately. Of course, then we have to worry about a6. I don't think there actually is a concern about a6. Knight a3 is a very weird move, but it might be a good one. Because if a6, and we go along on our merry plans of playing something like f4, let's say, and they play b5, we could take, and if they take back, we could actually take on b5. Because since our bishop's on c1, if they take on a8, we can take on c7. And even still, we could take on c7 because it's check. So we'd be winning a pawn there. This is a weird move, but I really like knight a3 for the moment. So I think I might want to retreat the piece. And the reason why is because I want to play f4, f5, where they can't actually do anything about this bishop being where it is. They have to move it away. And that's not something they'd be happy with. Here I'm going to play f3. This is what I wanted to play anyways. I wanted to play f4, so this just gives me the move. And another pro about it is if bishop d6, generally you don't want your bishop on d6 in these lines. You'll want your bishop on e7. One of the big reasons is because after bishop d6, there's knight b5. attacking both the queen and the bishop. We'll happily take that piece, and f4 will become even stronger. So now f4 looks like a really good move, because they just wasted a move here. And even if they get bishop g4 or if they get knight g4, I don't think it matters, right? We're covering e3 enough, and they're not castled yet. Their king isn't safe, whereas we're opening the position and getting a lot of activity. So I think f4 is the right call. Do I take it with the pawn or the bishop? So whenever they take, generally in the King's Indian, you get very comfortable with taking with the g-pawn. And it just gives you a lot of activity, and it's really annoying to play against. I'm not sure if I want to do that 100% though. So bishop g4, I could play something like bishop f3. I think queen e1 feels a little bit more natural. Knight b4 doesn't really threaten anything because c2 is covered. Yeah, I like queen e1. Because eventually this bishop might get kicked around a little bit. Like after f5, we're threatening h3 and g4 trapping the bishop. So they have to be really concerned about that. And g5 isn't really something to worry about. So yeah, f5. If I play f5 here, is h3 and g4 not just winning the bishop? Key piece of information to note here is that c2 is covered by my knight. If it wasn't, then this would be a bit stronger. Now bishop d6 doesn't really do anything. I can also... Oh, okay. That's a piece. This is a problem. So I think they missed that c2 was actually under my control. And now I'm going to go back since they didn't do anything about it. And I would really love to just plant my knight here on c4. Where it's on a beautiful square. And it's also just getting ready for a kingside attack. Or queenside attack, I guess we could say. Because this is considered the queenside. But since their king's there, I'm going to call it the kingside. At least for... one or two sentences here and there. Just because I'm annoying. So knight to b5 or knight to c4? This doesn't feel like a move because we can take and f6 is hanging. As we can see. So if we take here, then their knight can be captured next move if they don't do anything about it. We could also consider h3, g4. I just don't see the point because they castled queenside. And because they did, playing moves like h3 and g4 kind of asks them to open things up. And h3, g4 does trap the bishop, but there's also another problem. And that's that their knight is extremely weak. And we are up a piece in the first place. So do we need to be greedy? I'm not sure we do. I like taking on g6 here. If they move their knight or defend it, I would love to take on f7. Yeah, so here feels like we can just take comfortably. I don't see anything wrong with it. Rook takes f6. Everything is sufficiently defended. Now rook takes f7. I don't know if this one was necessary, but that's just who I am as a person. I'm annoying. Now knight g6. Right? We're getting our knight in there and kind of begging for trades. Because when you're up so much material, you don't gotta play crazy. You can just go for trades. Trades of pieces, not pawns. Pieces. That's actually a key piece of information to know. Like, if you're up a knight, and you trade off all the pawns, you're up a knight, but you can't checkmate with a lone knight. However, if you have a knight and a pawn, and they have a pawn, generally you can win that, because you can win their pawn by force. You have two attackers of a thing, and they can only have one defender at most. So, that's something important to mention. Here, it feels like we're doing good. So if they play any rook to f8, I could probably just take on e7 anyways. What if I took on g5? Because they can't take back, really. At least not comfortably. Because if they do, we win their queen. Do we need to do that? Maybe not. Maybe not. It is tempting, though. Oh, it's so tempting. Bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5, rook takes c7, king takes c7. And they get bishop e3 check in, king h1. But our knight is so good, I don't think that it matters. I think bishop takes g5 is playable. And I think that should cover it. And that should be the game. Yeah, so knight takes e7 now, with check. And we also have moves like knight b5, I guess. We could also just play knight d5. Knight d5 just defends everything. Knight d5 defends everything. It threatens the rook on d8, which they now have to move. And then we also get knight b5 in. This feels very comfortable. We're just trying to get all of our pieces in the game. That's it. Yeah, let's go for the easier exchange, taking on d8. And then something like rook f6. So if they take there, bishop c7 looks good. And I'm setting up a little tricky. After bishop c7 check, if they go king a8, I want to play knight, or queen, not knight, that is not a knight. I want to play queen to a5. And queen to a5 threatens knight b6 checkmate, which is kind of a funny looking smothered mate. They don't do it. They ruin my fun a bit, but I'll just keep improving my pieces, right? Now, bring the other knight in the game. And the problem is when we're up 10 points of material, we can kind of just make active moves, and they're always almost going to be good. And that's mainly just because we make threats that they can't stop, just because we're up too much material. So right now we're threatening knight d6 check, winning the house. Even if they move their king, we play knight d6 and win the exchange. Yeah, so knight d6 check wins the king now. Not the king, the queen. And I'll take that. So I want to play knight d8, and there's a funny reason why. I'm going for a specific checkmate. This is just setting something up. If you notice, they can't really move many places. Now, unfortunately, they can move here to e8, can they? Yeah. So that ruins my plans a bit. I was thinking of playing queen e2 here, where if bishop takes, then there's bishop h3. But they do have king e8. Does this still go on somehow? We have to look for a pretty checkmate as well as a good one. There's no such thing as a bad there's no such thing as a bad checkmate, right? I would like to do one with queen sacrifices involved, but maybe I'm getting a little spoiled. So I guess bishop d6 is a good enough one. If they take the knight, queen a5 check, followed by, yeah, and if they go there, then queen b4 check is mate in one. And we did it. we got to 1,000. And I think this was our first 1,000 rated opponent with the white pieces. I could be wrong about that. But if it is, I'm happy and I'm proud. So there's a lot to be proud of in this game. But let's talk more about it. So again, I should have played the knight f3 move order, which I didn't do, but that's okay. And I wonder if there's anything I missed that was worth discussing. I guess, yeah, e5 should have been something I considered. I wanted to go for a pure King's Indian structure if we got it. And maybe I was too insistent on it. e5 supposedly gives white pretty nice position. After the move knight e4, this does look good. But I also didn't mind having just a reverse King's Indian. I think the point is that since the fight is around the e5 square, whenever white occupies it, like in this position, funnily enough, yeah, actually white still does have an advantage, even though we have less space, because we're up a few moves here. And the queen on b6 doesn't really feel like it belongs there in these types of positions. But we didn't necessarily have to go for this because, well, the fight is for the square. Like, if you look at a mainline King's Indian, you'll see that f4 gets played, and generally black's going to play a move like f6 to try to maintain that pawn on e5. And if they can, it feels like the side playing the King's Indian or the side with less space can sometimes struggle and not really feel happy, though with a very good amount of counterplay in return. But the reason why I think e5 is definitely favored in these positions is the exact same reason why we play f4, and that's just because this gets the e5 square where they can't play e5 and moves like f6. So that's something to consider. Yeah, and there's also even moves like knight c4 here, and yeah, actually bishop f4 as well, which is kind of nasty, just continuously going for it. And instead of even putting a pawn here, we could even put a knight here. So there's several ways to get an advantage. A4 isn't really maybe the most active or accurate. I was happy with the play. I think we got a good position, totally fine one. But we could have gotten more, and that's the important part, is we want to go for more when we can. So just something to keep in mind. But is there anything else to cover? I would say, yeah, this bishop g4 felt a little pointless. f3 top move, not surprised about that. f4 after, top move as well, not surprised about that. And when they go back with bishop g4, the problem is after we move, the bishop on g4 feels a little weird, doesn't it? Like knight b4, it doesn't really feel like it does anything for the position, because they're not developing their bishop anyway. Like if they play something like bishop e7, it makes more sense, but there's still possibly problems. The first thing I would have to look at is, does f5 win the bishop? Here it doesn't. There's knight d7, and they have active counterplay against our knight on h4. Like if h3 here, I believe they take on h4 instead. And if takes back, then they have bishop h5, and they're just holding on. But here, there still is problems with moves like knight f5, which are also very popular. And the reason why is because you open up this long diagonal for the bishop. And even though our pawn structure looks a little weird, we're extremely active. And this is something that black should be very concerned about, because they are underdeveloped. And I think that's going to cover it for this game.